Welcome to the Next Gen CMO podcast, where we sit down with seasoned CMOs and emerging talents in sales and marketing to explore the wins and occasional losses that shape today's leaders and the strategic maneuvers that can help propel you to the forefront of B2B marketing.
All right. Welcome to our Next Gen CMO podcast. Today, we are excited to welcome Heidi Bullock to the podcast. Welcome, Heidi.
Thanks for having me, Kelly. Happy to be here.
Awesome. For folks who don't know Heidi is an experienced marketing executive. She's been in the space for a long time, 20 plus year career. She's worked at global enterprise tech companies. She's worked at startups. She's worked in bioscience. She's worked in rev tech and marketing tech. And so she's got a lot of different experiences to bring into this conversation today. So we're excited to learn more about her and the importance of understanding data as your career develops.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, let's start with you. So Heidi and I never met until this podcast process, but she and I are connected to a lot of the same folks. So I'm so excited to get to put a name with a face, because I've certainly heard her name over the years. So it's great to meet you. Tell me a little bit about you and your role at a high level, either currently at Tealium or in the years leading up to it.
Sure. Sounds good. So I'm currently the CMO at Tealium, and I've been at the company for over 4 years. Prior to that, I was at a startup called Engagio with John Miller, who was the founder of Marketo. And I was at Marketo for quite a long time. But I think maybe what your audience would find interesting is before that, I actually was more in product marketing and marketing, but in the life sciences space. So very, very different than MarTech, very regulated, lots of process. I actually started my career in molecular biology in a lab. So fun fact about me, I've actually worn a clean suit and been in clean rooms and done a lot. Like if you can think about it in a lab, I've probably done it. So I've worked with, radioactivity. I've worked with mice, all sorts of things. So to me, being in SaaS and marketing, it's really fun. And I think it's in some ways a lot easier. So maybe that's why I can handle it. I don't know.
I love that. That's funny. Yeah, I started my career as an industrial engineering. So my first summer internship was on a manufacturing floor, like in a steel mill with line workers, trying to figure out throughputs and productivity and all that. And you look at that versus marketing, MarTech, and I mean, two completely different worlds. But I love that you have that background.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's interesting though, because I will say that the big change with marketing, and I remember some of my first roles, like I would notice like data and I'm like, oh, it's not, there's not 10 sources or there's not all this like evidence behind it. And some folks are just like, yeah, but it seems logical. We're just going to use it. And so that was a big shift for me. I'm like, everything I was used to before had to be like published in Nature or Science, and lots of validation, and marketing can be a little different. It's funny.
Yeah, that's so true. I hadn't really thought about like all the data. The most things we hit, obviously data to justify our jobs and our performance, but also to make claims in the market. I remember when I was, and maybe that would be more true at like a life sciences, when I was at Kraft Foods, we would claim like 1,000 chips in every bag or whatever, because I was managing chocolate chip cookies. And so we'd literally have to go into the lab and count how many like break apart the cookies in a package and count how many chocolate chips to make sure that we were making a claim that could be defensible with the data in order to take it to market. So that's funny that's the world you come from. Speaking of data, let's talk about that.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So I'm sure you talk data all the time. And so tell us a little bit about kind of the role that data plays, maybe throughout your career, but specifically in the world of CMO and how you're using that today.
Yeah. I mean, I think at a high level, I mean, more so now than I would say, gosh, at probably any point in history, data it's so widely available. I think like, especially with AI and a lot of the new technologies, I think it's a lot of organizations and teams probably have more data than ever before. And there's obviously all types of data. I think, in my particular role at Tealium, we work a lot with customer data. So that's an area that I think a lot about, but just specifically with marketing, I think the key for me that I've always liked data is it's not your opinion. And I think a lot of folks sometimes can struggle with credibility or I have often seen in my career and experience, people having a struggle with arguments because it's more their thoughts, their opinions, or, hey, at the last company I was at, this is what we did, versus using data. And it's like really no one's opinion. It's just the interpretation of what you're seeing. It's like, hey, we surveyed this, sizable group of folks, and it seems like they all prefer cherries versus these grapes. And so I think that's what I personally love about data is it just sort of takes the emotion out of things. And I think, for better or for worse, a lot of marketers, we are passionate, we are excited, we love what we do. But sometimes I think that I've seen folks struggle being, I think, compelling with their arguments when they do not use data. And that's why I love it, because again, it just takes sort of the emotion out of things.
I think it's so true. I think having data becomes defensible, to your point. One of the themes of this podcast that we talk about specifically is around sales and marketing alignment. And when you think about that, data is a source of alignment, right? It means that you're not sort of justifying that we're doing good enough marketing or that they're doing good enough sales. Like, data is the thing, the mutually agreed upon center ground where you can say, hey, we can see the data. We know if it's working or not working. And then it sort of takes the lack of trust or the lack of ownership out, because you can see right there the proof in there. How has data affected, you think, your partnerships with sales teams?
Yeah. So, in my current role, I own our SDR organization, and that's a whole other piece of things as well. And I think there's always discussions around, as an example, like for many companies, for us, we're very much pipeline focused, revenue focused. And so it might be, hey, is the SDR team, are they generating great meetings? And I think kind of going back to data, do we all agree on criteria? Do we all agree on the same process? And if that's the case, then it can get rid of points of tension. And I think a lot around marketing and sales alignment is a few things. And I think if everyone kind of can agree on the overall goals, and it's a clear process, that's kind of number one. But two, if everyone's incentivized around the same things, that also helps a lot. And I think historically we've seen it where marketing teams, it's like they might, sort of be incentivized around things like historically MQLs, or even in some cases, like for us, like meetings. But it's almost like, how can we all take it to the next level where if everyone's being incentivized around the same things, like both teams have a pipeline goal and we are aligned on it, we're aligned on the criteria. I think that just creates so much more, it just reduces tension. And I think it really gives the marketing organization more credibility. And I think another side of this is many of us can relate to this, where the sales team might say, hey, we really want to make sure that we're doing X, Y, Z activity. Maybe it's an event that they want to go to. And again, instead of using your emotion, but it's like, hey, you're right. I noticed this event last time we did it was amazing. Great. We should do it again. Or interesting, the last time we did this, we generated 1 meeting, not 5. Maybe we should consider this other thing over here that's better for you personally. So that's why I like data, again, because it just sort of it can take out emotion, which can be good. And I think it also just helps us, if we use it in the right way, to be just more aligned around the same goal. What you don't want is marketing and sales having completely different goals, different language. That's not a good thing. And I still see that at a lot of companies. It's like, I still feel like I get on calls and hear marketers talking about, oh, we're focused on MQLs or leads. And then the sales team's like, well, I don't think about that at all. And that doesn't mean anything to me. And I think it's like, how can you use the same language and have, again, shared goals and data so that people feel a lot more that they're on the same team, not like different groups.
Yeah. What do you think those big goals are? Do you think it's all the way to revenue? Do you hold marketing all the way to revenue, or to pipe, or to marketing sourced pipe? What do you think are sort of those big goals?
Yeah. So I think for us, there's a few areas that I look at, but I think just to be like at the highest level, for us, it's a big land and expand motion as well. So I would say that we definitely look at meetings, again, because I own our SDR team, and that's something that's very tangible. And we have a set criteria. We look at pipeline, definitely pipeline, and that's shared with sales and our partner team. And then I do look at bookings. I care a lot about that. It's like if you're creating pipeline, but it's not converting, that's a problem. And I understand that it's the seller that's ultimately going to, accept the opportunity or determine it's an opportunity and move it forward. but I want to make sure that whatever we're serving up is high quality, and that can happen. So at my level, yes, I am responsible for bookings and revenue. And then I also look at retention and expansion as well. And I think if you're in a SaaS company, those are important things to pay attention to, because again, we own product marketing. And if product marketing is doing a good job, we should ultimately see a lot of the, ideally win rates are better, velocity is smoother, like you see deals progressing more quickly. So yes, I do. But then I think roles on my team, I hold them more to pipeline.
Gotcha. Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. I think that my chief sales officer partner and I talk a lot about this, that we're all aligned to revenue. We're all aligned to pipe. The main parts I can impact are going to be maybe through pipe. But at the end of the day, like, we're not backing into win rates of revenue or bookings. We're not backing into conversion rates. We're looking at MQLs this morning, not because we care about MQLs, but because we were saying, hey, pipe looks like it's a little soft. Why? One click SQL seems solid. Okay, so it's not that why. It's like, oh, I see. It's because we have this MQL issue. We're not bringing enough volume in. So we can troubleshoot through it, but it's definitely not the metric you hold your team accountable to, because it doesn't matter.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I wish more people thought of it that way. It's like, I know that this is a topic that I care a lot about, because sometimes people say like, well, what are the key metrics? And I always say, well, it sort of depends, because for the marketing organization, to your exact point, Kelly, it's like, we are going to look at MQLs, or some people look at marketing qualified accounts, whatever terminology you use, it doesn't really matter. It's like, we look at that to troubleshoot. Like, I look at social impressions. I care about that. But that's not something, and I'm going to talk to my CRO about, or my CF. They don't care. But I look at it almost as an engineer would, because I want to understand, are my systems in place? Are they working, or is something really off? And that's what I use it for. It's more of a diagnostic tool, but just understanding that, like, yes, there's certain people, sure, we're going to look at email performance metrics and all the things, but I think it's important for people to know your head of sales or your CRO, they're not going to care about that. They're not going to really care about MQLs. What they care about is quality pipeline that they can, convert quickly and ultimately, get the bookings that they're trying to achieve. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now that's the sales part. Do you have the same conversation about metrics with your CFO or your CEO? Do you care? Do they all care about the same thing, or do you manage that data presentation different?
I manage it a little bit differently. I think with our CFO, and I would encourage everybody listening. I mean, I think if you're in a senior marketing position, you have to have a great relationship with finance and your CFO. It's so critical. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize that, but marketing, we probably have the biggest budget in the entire company. I think we have the most spend, right? And so yeah, they're going to care about what you're doing. And so I think sometimes when I've said that to people, they don't really think about it. They're like, oh, I didn't realize that engineering doesn't have this huge budget like we do. I'm like, they don't. It's, marketing has, the majority of the spend. And so the way I work with my CFO is the things that he really cares about are we tracking with our budget, number one, which we monitor very closely. Two, I really talk about things almost like a stock portfolio. So I think that this is a helpful thing, because again, like, you can think about your own kind of portfolio. It's like you might have investments in different areas. Say you have NVIDIA, say you have Google stock, that they perform differently at different times. But I think being able to explain that if I put in $1 and I can guarantee you I'm going to get 10 out in pipeline, that's a good investment. And that's kind of how I discuss things with him. And I think that works. And I basically kind of report monthly on overall how our portfolio is doing. And I monitor that. And it's like, I can also explain, look, if we're going to invest heavily in events, we know those are more expensive. The return we'll probably see a little bit later, probably 8 months out. So it will dip for a little bit. But as long as I can explain that, I think that's critical. I think what people dislike is, well, why is something performing well, or why isn't it? And when you can't explain it, that it's not confidence inspiring, right? It's like, you kind of want to know, like, oh, the grass is growing in my front yard because I'm watering a lot. It's like, if you can't answer that question, it's a little strange. So I think keeping it simple and making sure that that you're on top of your organization and where dollars are going. The worst is when somebody asks, I've seen this with different marketers and they're like, oh, I don't really know why we signed that PO for, $30,000. Well, that's a problem. You need to know why you did it and what you can expect back. And I think that's really critical. And I think when you have that credibility, they're going to be a lot more likely to trust you and give you dollars, right? And this is true. It's almost like I have teenagers. I feel the same way. It's like, hey, if I don't feel like you're spending your money well, it's all going to DoorDash. No, I'm not going to keep giving you money, right? So I think that that's an important thing. And the other thing I know that this is one that I would highlight, no one likes surprises. No CFO in the world wants to hear, hey, we did a huge user group meeting and surprise, we're over 50K. Like, not a good look, right? So I think it's just like you would in your personal life, be on top of your finances, communicate frequently, and then that relationship, I think, is going to be a good one that'll serve you well.
Yeah. Yeah. I so appreciate that. I feel like when we look at the year, marketing pipeline is not necessarily,
linear
throughout the year. Yeah. It's not linear.
Not linear.
So being able to have that conversation, exactly what you said. I talk with our CFO all the time and say, hey, Q1 is going to be soft because our big events are in Q2. And that's where we're spiking a lot of our programs. And so you should see a lot coming out of Q2, which should drive revenue in Q3 based on sales cycles, whatever. And then they're like, okay, I can anticipate the budget. Then I'm like, but we still need to spend in Q1 to drive traffic to the Q2. And so the payout is going to get there by the end. It just might not be on a daily basis. And I think that's spot on to say, to have that open dialogue and transparency with your CFO to just set those expectations.
Yeah. And also taking the budget process seriously. And I think that, a lot of what is kind of tricky about marketing is at the end of the day, you do have to be an expert in a lot of areas. And I think all of us think about, of course, we have to know email marketing, digital marketing, ABM, all, even your MarTech stack. But I also would tell people listening, you've got to be good at numbers and finance and your budget and understand how it works. Because again, it's like your investments are so critical for your success. And so that is an area that, if you haven't done it, spend some time. There's great things that you can learn online just to get really good at understanding how a CFO thinks, how, your head of finance thinks, and really how they're trying to manage dollars for the business, because they're trying to do the best things too to make the company successful. And it's like you have to partner with them on that.
Yeah, marketing is not the art form it once was. It's now a science, absolutely. And especially in being in the SaaS space and B2B tech, where it is very much a revenue marketing operation more so than a brand in a comms space. It's obviously that as well. But what keeps the lights on is that sort of very clear payback on how much are we spending and what are we acquiring with it and what does that cycle look like?
Right. It's just like any of your personal investments. You wouldn't work with somebody and say, hey, here's $100,000. Oh, it's okay if I don't see any return from that. Like that would never happen. And I think if more people can get in the mindset, like you have a big responsibility, you're given dollars that this is how I think of it. You're essentially investing that in a portfolio, and it's your job to get the best return out as possible. And I think you can appreciate this, I'm sure, but it's like I tell people, in my career, even at my time at Marketo, my budget did not go up every year. I was expected to get better return on my investment. I was expected to be more efficient. And I think that surprises some people. It's like, I'm sure you see this sometimes with the team. It's like, oh, wow, we might not have as many dollars this year, or the investment's a little, tighter, but that's okay. I'm like, that's our job is to understand over time, hey, these are the levers, we know it's working and we can optimize that.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually doubling into that, what you just said, because we're talking about payback. We're talking about, being able to get more efficient year after year. The reason we can do that, to your point, is because we can look at the past data and say this worked or didn't. Let's optimize here. Let's do more of this, less of this. But that only comes through attribution. We haven't talked about that. Tell me a little bit about what you think about, there's lots of debates, first touch, last touch, multi-touch, what you believe on that, what you use, and how do you, what are sort of the trade-offs of the one that you choose? They have cons.
I think it's such a big topic. I feel like we could have a whole podcast just on that. And I'm sure there's lots of opinions. This is what I will say in years, I feel like, of doing this. And my opinion has changed, I think, over time. I think early in my career, I was probably one of the people that would use tools and say, I almost thought of it as a perfect science. But I think the longer I've done this, I would say yes, we measure everything possible. But the way I look at it is it's directional. And that's a word I use a lot. I'm like, this is not a perfect science. And we all know this, especially if I think it can be a little bit more accurate if you're more in the consumer marketing space where it's like shopping carts and things tend to be like very instant, say you're a consumer-based company, you market shoes, somebody sees it, they purchase it. It's very easy to track that. But I think in a lot of the, sort of the world we're in where it's more of an enterprise sale, we look at our data and, again, when people buy our product, it's a pretty significant price point. It's something an entire organization uses. And so we might see on average, like sometimes 20 people will touch a deal. And sometimes it's more. And that may occur over a period of, it could be 8 months, it could even be a year. It's like, because it's almost, if you want to think about it, it's almost like infrastructure that you're purchasing. And so it's never something as simple as, I saw an ebook, I downloaded it, let's give all the credit to that first touch or last touch. And so I really try to look at the data and understand, what are themes that are resonating with our audience? That's important to me, right? Like, what are the topics that seem common in all the deals where they seem to be engaging with that? Are there channels that we notice are really good for that early education? And then what are the programs that seem to really push people over the line? So I also look a lot at velocity, which I know, some people have different opinions on that, but I do think our big challenge in our business is really trying to shrink that timeline as much as we can. And so it's really, for me, I like to look at, great, it seems like we get a lot of people first touch on, maybe for my business, it might be like third-party cookie laws or privacy laws, certain things. And then I notice, wow, when we run these field events like workshops, we certainly seem to close people pretty quickly. So the honest answer is I do look at first touch. I look at last touch. We use a tool called Visible, so we can like apply different models, which is nice. So I know some people like to look at U-shape. There's all sorts of ways to look at your data, but I can tell you there's still going to be a salesperson that's like, well, I called Martin last week and that's not in your data anywhere. And Martin made the decision or something like that. So I always think it's really always important to kind of remind people that it's not a perfect science. It's not the last touch that did it, because you might have had somebody else involved in the deal that's not really an easy thing to track. I mean, people always talk about like dark social and things like that. It's hard to get all of it. But I think as much as you can, it is important, because there are things where you may be doing it and it just doesn't seem to be in the mix at all. Great, get rid of it. You don't need to do it. The other thing I would highlight that is important, we have a meeting that we run every month, and it's our program review meeting, where we look at all the programs, all the data, and we invite anyone that wants to join. Because my number one thing is being transparent. And I'm like, marketing shouldn't be a mystery. And I tell people, it's not like our team. I'm sure, Kelly, your team, we're not in love with events. We're not in love with digital. We don't really care, to be honest. We're going to invest where we see the results. And we look at the data and we do the best we can with what we have. And we make decisions based on that. And we take it seriously. And I think that sort of transparency and being open about it's great, because I do see sometimes with marketing teams, it's like, oh, like, we look at first, people make it so hard that I think other executives are like, this is like, it's like, if you can't explain it in simple terms, people are not going to believe it. And so I think that that's an area that I think is important for people too. But yeah, we use Visible. We look at the programs that create first touch, and then sort of like, what do we feel like are good, I would say, deal accelerators. That's what I think a lot about. And then we also look at different programs, like what seems to work for expansion, because as I mentioned in our business, that's a big thing. So yeah, we do try to look at everything, but I guess I do feel that I see some people say it's definitely this one thing. And it as you know, it's usually not. So
yeah, I love that you say directional. I think that's right. I always sort of think of it as it's just relative, not absolute. So I don't really say this program drove $1.2 million.
Right.
But I look at it as I say, this program obviously had more influence maybe than this other program. And so we're going to invest more over here, or that one didn't. affect as much as we were hoping. And so therefore we're going to do less of that one. So I love that because it does give you a point of comparison. And yeah, I think we've gone through the same thing. You know, I think on First Touch, I think a lot of, because when I got here to Demandbase, we weren't doing First Touch at all. It was all visible, all multi-touch. And my challenge on that was like, I want to know what brought them into the franchise. What made them come in? Like, what was the thing that made them say, I've had enough of what I need that I'm ready to take action? Was it this piece of content? Was this webinar? Was it a great article they read through organic? Like, what is it that brought them in? And then you kind of get a feel like, okay, now I can see what are the vehicles I need to dive into and spend some more focus on because it's going to help bring folks in. But then the multi-touch, it's really helpful to understand that like there is marketing influence happening all the time. It is not a one and done. It does touch all these different elements. But then there's sort of the BS component of it. I look at them sometimes and I'm like, because the way that, for folks listening, the way that like a multi-touch model works is it gives a certain weight to the first touch, a certain weight to the last touch, a certain weight to, I think, pipe convert, and then everything else kind of gets divided by the balance. And so sometimes you look at that and you're like, okay, this is really helpful. And other times you're like, oh, wow, that Amazon gift card that we sent them for $100 after the deal closed is getting all the last touch credit. And I'm like, man, that Amazon gift card got $50,000 credit. And you're like, it didn't actually. It was a thank you gift. But because of the way the model is, you kind of have to take it to your point with a grain of salt. It's directional to say, hey, these big programs worked or seem to be working, are touching a lot of the deals. Let's do more things like that. So I love the way you said that.
And I also think it's important for people to like understand the models too, because it's like you said, like sometimes multi-touch is like, it's basically just saying, let's give, you're right, like everything, all the credit to the first touch, and then everything else is kind of like divided equally versus saying, oh, we feel like a webinar is worth more than email and people can approach it all different ways. But I think you said it well. It's like, it's trying to understand what's the question you're trying to ask. And I always think like start with the question first. What's important for getting people interested in Demandbase at point, kind of time zero? Let's understand that. What's kind of the programs or interactions that kind of make them more engaged or get them more excited over time? It's like, and I think when you ask it like that, then you can look at the data in a more informed way and it's helpful. But I do think it is critical to look at data frequently. And it also, like, if you do, you can also see where, I don't know, it's interesting. Sometimes you'll see like, wow, it seems like we're really spending a lot in one area and maybe we need to like diversify that a little bit, or gosh, what a surprise. This one thing is working great. I mean, I don't know if that ever happens to you. Sometimes I think, geez, I'm so smart. This email is great. And it's like the worst one ever. And I think I kind of love when that happens because it's like, I was wrong because I'm not in a lot of cases our target buyer. Great. Good for me to know. And I always think it's just important. And I think it's good to always see like, yeah, your gut instinct isn't always right.
Yeah.
That's why you need the data to look at. So
yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that goes to one, making like you talked about, decision-making, troubleshooting, being able to course correct and that kind of thing. The other piece that we haven't talked about, and maybe it's a little pivot off of data, is about marketing ourselves internally. You and I spend our days marketing externally, right? And that's what we do. We're driving programs out into the market to influence customers, influence prospects, build our brands, drive revenue. What's the importance of marketing our teams, our function, ourselves internally inside a company?
Yeah, I think it's so critical and so important. And I definitely feel like it's one of the biggest, I don't want to say mistakes, but kind of misses for a lot of people. Because I definitely know people, I'm like, they're so talented. They're doing such a great job. And as a marketer, we appreciate, I think, each other's craft. Like you definitely see companies you're like, oh, I love that. They're doing great. And it makes me happy. I get excited to see what other people do. But then you can talk to them and they're like, wow, I'm really struggling. Like my CRO is just not getting it or different things. And I think that a lot of marketers, no one has ever said, your job, yes, is your customer base and potential customer base, but it's also your internal revenue teams. It's your sales team. They're equally important, if not more than who you're marketing to externally, your customer success team, your executive team. And if people do not understand, your goals, what you're doing, why you're doing certain things, unfortunately, it's human nature. It's like if people don't see it, they don't believe it's happening. Or and that's why, historically, I find a lot of people love events because they see it, they understand it. Everybody's been to a party, they kind of get it, right? But it's like most people are like, oh, I hate content syndication. I feel like that's the classic one. No one likes content syndication because most people don't understand it, to be honest, and they don't get how it's used in a cycle. So I think it's really important. One of the things that I'd recommend to everyone is I always think it's good. I do two things, and I tend to be very consistent with these, and I do not add a lot more to it. Because you also hear like marketers sometimes like overdo it. Like there's too much communication. I send out one email in the beginning of the week to our revenue teams, and it's called our top 5. It's literally the top 5 things that you need to know that marketing's up to this week. And then we have references for other things like our customer stories, anything else. We even have these plays that if people want to run a play, it's there. But 5 things everyone needs to know. It might be, great, we're going to be at this event this week, or we just launched, this ebook on zero-party data, or whatever it is. That's all. And then with my executive team, I go through our numbers every week, our pipeline, and really some top priorities, and I do it every week so they see it. And I never want somebody to say, we don't know what marketing's up to. We don't get it. And I really am open to a conversation around, are there questions? Do people understand why? And it really gives people the opportunity to, if they don't like something, to say it. I'd rather know than have them hold that back. And it just creates a lot of dialogue and credibility. And I think doing those two things, and I did that at the beginning of my job at Tealium. I did that at previous organizations as well. And I just think it trains people. It's like, wow, if I have a question, I'm always just going to go to the deck she puts together, or the email. It's all there. And it's true. It's like people can always find it. It's just like a resource. And I just think the big thing is being transparent and giving people the opportunity, to ask questions. Because in a lot of cases, they don't necessarily know why, a marketing team is going to do certain things over something else. And I think that that's a really important exercise. And I think, again, your sales team and your customer success team, they're your customers too. And so you have to treat it that way. And I think it's a mindset. I don't know that everyone thinks about it that way.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. I think those are 2 notes for myself. Good learnings for me. On that note, just because we're just talking about the internal marketing, are these, and because so this podcast is Next Gen CMO, the idea is that it's either modern thinking of CMOs that are sort of thinking about things differently, next generation tech, or the other side of future CMOs, up and coming CMOs who want to be. So when you're thinking about that weekly email, probably that one more than the executive team review, is that coming from you as the CMO, or is it coming from your revenue marketing leader? Is it coming
from my revenue marketing leader?
Gotcha. Okay.
It is. Yeah. Because I really my view is, and this could just be my perspective, but I view in our roles, it's our job to sort of lift others up. I sort of feel I feel like at this point, I've done it a long time. I sort of feel like it's a playbook I understand well. I like it. It's energizing to me, but I've done those things, and I want other people to be seen as that point person. I don't need to be that person for all things, nor I actually don't want to be either. And so I have my revenue leader send that out, and then I'm the person that will go through the deck with the executive team. And again, I think I have the team really comprise some of the slides, which then I think is good in their meetings. It's like they then have already created the material. They're not doing it 20 times. And it's like, so if they're on the North America sales call and someone's like, hey, walk us through this new play, it's like, great, we already have the slides set up. So, but yes, it is my revenue leader that sends that out.
Gotcha. Okay. I think that's great. That's kind of what I was wondering is, how do you kind of spread? It's not just about building your brand or CMO brand, but building marketing credibility inside
100%.
At whatever level. I think that's awesome.
That's right.
Very cool. All right. So lots to unpack here. One more kind of pivot again. So you've worked, at a lot of successful MarTech SaaS companies. You're at Tealium now. You've been at Marketo. You've been at Engagio. AI is a big piece of where these companies are going. It's where the industry is going. It's where marketers are being asked to invest. What are we doing with Gen AI? All of that. How do you think this is changing the way that you look at either your tech stack or your data What do you think about, and what do you want marketers to be aware of when they're considering AI offerings?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I would say is always keep a curious mindset and sort of that growth mindset. I know that some people listening to this are probably like, growth mindset, here we go again. It's like, oh, we get it. But I think it's so important. Because I think there are some people that sort of say, like, I remember when, ChatGPT was first available. I think I had like one of the early versions of it. And this was like, I think like not this holiday, but last holiday before that in December. And I was like, this is incredible. Like, I can do all these blog posts so much faster. Like, it's making me so much more efficient. And it's just kind of that saying, like, play around with things and learn about them, figure it out. It's like these tools can make you so much more efficient. I mean, we use Canva, and there's some great capabilities in that. We use a tool called Tuesday SO for our SDR team, and they can look somebody up and it helps create this amazing, email. I mean, of course, everyone uses Grammarly, tools like that. It just saves you time on sort of tasks that can be like, they just can burn your cycles, right? I know people that, use ChatGPT for like their spreadsheets. It's amazing. You can use it for so many powerful things, or like message testing, all these great things. And so for me, I think this isn't something, it's not a fad, it's not going away. So I think what I would say is it's important to figure out these tools aren't going to replace people. They're making it so we can spend time on the things that really matter and getting rid of so many of the remedial tasks. But I think the key is just at a high level, many of these tools are really going to depend on the data that you have and you feed them. I mean, this is a big thing with Tealium, like where we help. It's like we bring a lot of disparate data together and make sure that it's, filtered, complete, enriched, and also compliant. So that way, if people do have AI models that they're putting it into, it can be delivered quickly in real time. But it's again, data that is been cleaned and making sure that it's, up to date, current, all the things. So I do think thinking about your customer data as sort of your competitive advantage is really the future. And we see it. I mean, we're more on the B2B side, but a lot of the consumer companies, this is just where it's at right now, that the companies that know their consumer win. And you have to have ways of doing that. And that's really pretty exciting. But I think in the more of the B2B context, it's find the tools that can help you and save you time. And I'm just kind of been shocked by it, honestly. Like when I hear people saying like, wow, like SEO or things like that, I'm like, there's tools for all of that now. You don't have to like pay money for a contractor or like spend, and you can use your team to be more valuable and creative. And I just think it's amazing. I think we don't even realize the impact of it yet. I think it's almost like, I mean, this is like dating myself, but I remember being in college and it's like, even like all the, like Google tools like that were relatively new. I mean, that's crazy, but now you don't even think of it. And I think AI is just going to change the way we work and think. It's really awesome.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I joke with my kids that I'm sort of the last generation of like, I saw the before and I saw the after. And the after is not totally there yet, all these AI tools that are coming. But, I remember people had to call my house and talk to my dad to talk to me because I was, because we only had landlines. And my first cell phone was when I was 23 years old. And so there's all these, like, it's a different world. But I sat at dinner the other night. I have an 11-year-old daughter. I have 2 teenage boys also, but I have a daughter. And she and her friend, the way that they entertained themselves while us moms were talking was they did Canva design contests. They were basically building like books or posters or wallpaper or whatever by theme. So they'd be like, Mom, tell me what theme. And I'd be like, I don't know, like, preppy cowgirl. And they'd be like, okay. And then they'd like compete. And then we give them like 2 minutes and they'd come and they'd have created an entire storyboard on preppy cowgirl, like, because Canva has all these great tools. And they were just deciding, and I'm just like, man, like we can create faster. She had to create an ebook for school and was able to create it in like an hour because the layouts were all there and it was just about the content. And anyway, it's amazing.
It is amazing. And it's so exciting because it's like it's like your vision can come to life so much quicker. And like Canva, like if anyone's not using Canva, it's like amazing. Like I feel like I'm like, this is my dream tool because I used to use Adobe Photoshop which is still, a great tool, but it's just what Canva lets you do with you don't have to be an expert at anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think, again, just be the kind of person that's curious, explore tools, play around with things. And it's amazing what you can find out and things that can just help you in your job.
Well, thank you. I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Great advice for folks around using data, marketing internally, being curious, and playing with AI tools. So thank you for all of that. One last question before we leave. What is one thing that most people don't know about you?
This is a tough one. I think one thing that people do not know about me, I know that people know that I've never had Velveeta, nor will I ever eat it. Freaks me out. I know it's a crazy fact. This is true. I've never had it. And I'm just like, it's not cheese. What is it?
I'm a former Kraft Foods cheese marketer. So I'll respond when you're done, but go ahead.
So I think people know that about me. I think maybe something that people don't know about me is maybe what I said in the beginning. It's like I did start my career in molecular biology. And I think that I spent, a lot of time in a full clean room suit, which I don't know that everyone knows what that is. It's like you even have like a hood and you have to learn how to walk really slowly so you don't, kick up dust when you're doing certain tests and experiments. And I think a lot of people that know me, that's probably a pretty funny visual.
What's in my that switch? I mean, that's a big switch from starting there and running, labs in a clean suit and move over to now doing marketing. So that's amazing. It shows that there's lots of different career paths to get to marketing.
It really is true. And that's kind of why I wanted to tell that story versus other funny personal stories that people might be like, wow. Because I do want people to feel inspired. I feel like I know so many folks that start in one type of role. And it's like, you can do anything that you want to do if you're persistent and you recognize that, the way that you advance and get, to that next phase is bringing value. And that's why I said it's important to be curious. Never be the person that's like, even where we're at, like, it's not like we sit back and are like, oh, I'm in my role. I know all there is to know. It's like, I actually realize how much more there is to know and learn. And I think if you can always be that kind of person that's curious, play around with things. Everyone knows the saying, do something and find out. I won't use the word, but it's like, that's the truth, right? It's like, and if you can bring value and deliver value for your organization, it will be recognized and rewarded. And we live a long time now. It's like it's not the 1800s where everyone dies at 45.
You have plenty of time, right? To do it all.
Right. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm trying to remember the stat, not to go back to your little sidebar personal point. I think we used to say, so I was a brand manager at Kraft Foods, and I worked on Kraft string cheese and I worked on Breakstone cottage cheese, but we all worked together. I think the stat is something like there's more dairy, like more real cheese in a can of easy cheese, the little thing that you put on Ritz crackers, than there is in a box of Velveeta. So fun fact there. So you're probably smart to stay away from it. The fact that it's shelf stable until you open it is probably a good sign too that maybe it's risky.
Exactly. Yeah. The color, there's just aspects that are concerning. So
I love it. Well, awesome. Well, Heidi, it was so good to have you here. Thank you for joining us. And thank you to our listeners for listening to our next episode of a Next Gen CMO podcast. But it was great having you. Have a great weekend.